Our next speaker is Nmadili Okwumabua. I hope I did not murder the name. Apologies. So she is a cultural designer, urbanist, and educator in African architecture and community planning. Her passion for design is rooted in a vision where communities in Africa and the diaspora are developed with new architectural languages that preserve heritage and are culturally and environmentally sustainable. In 2005, she founded Southern Sahara USA, an international consultancy specializing in the research and development of this new architecture. Nmadili attended the University of Tennessee and Georgia State University, where she pursued undergraduate studies in architecture and urban studies. She holds a master's degree in African and African American studies from Clark Atlanta University, where her research centered on the evolution of modern vernacular architecture in Nigeria. In 2013, the fruits of these efforts gave birth to the Community Planning and Design Initiative Africa, CPDI Africa, a research-based, culture-inspired initiative created to develop a new African architectural languages through design competition. Um, Without further ado, I would yield the floor to Nmadili.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let me ask if I can have the permissions to share my screen, and then I'll get right into it. I'm really excited to be here. I'm actually sitting in Abuja now. I'm so happy to be back home. Um, and really thrilled to be invited to participate in this discussion today. Thanks to everyone who made it possible. Architect Aisha, you know yourself, the president of ACMAN, all the members, our moderator today, the guests, co-speakers, everyone truly appreciative of this time to be with everyone. So let me see if I can share my screen. Yes. All right, 1 second. All right, let's hide this bar. Slideshow. All right. Okay. All right. So hopefully everybody can see. Yeah, once again, really grateful for being here, talking about innovative approaches to sustainable architecture. Let me put my timer on because I know how to talk. Today's lecture will be case studies, best practices, and regulating frameworks for urban development in Nigeria is the topic of my presentation. Again, thanks, ACMAN, for this invitation to speak today. Introduction. Why is it important to regulate best practices for architecture and urban development in Nigeria, Africa, or any region in the world for that matter? For that, I always like to start off by defining architecture. Our previous presentation by Architect Chung, that was really fantastic. Really defining all of those things that are so important when we say the word architecture. It's the art and science of constructing buildings, yes, we know, but the extended definition is that architecture is the reflection of the culture, lifestyle, aesthetics, local building materials, their climate, geography, political and economic purchasing power of a people and a place. All of those things tie into the word sustainability, right? So it is when we reflect all of those things about a region that we have the word architecture. It is not defined only by one people's culture or by one people's region. It does not mean that when you say the word architecture that you throw out all of the things that define your own definition. You throw all those things out the window and you begin to try and force another person's definition. into your space, it doesn't work, and it does not yield for sustainability. What is that sustainability? How can we design and build affordably? What materials are we using? Are we having to use, expensive power to cool our buildings because we're not respecting climate, location, right? It's cold right now in Jos, but most of the time it's very hot, right? So how do we design sustainably? So when you talk about all of these elements reflected in people's built environment, it should make sense that wherever you go in the world, architects, urban planners, but most importantly, the people, right? Because I come from a cultural perspective. What's the people's interpretation of architecture? What is their own local languages, their own local science and technology, their own aesthetics, right? How does the community engage to build? Spirituality, all these things are so important for something to be sustainable, because you can only sustain what is coming from you. It is hard to sustain what is coming from outside, right? Whether you are borrowing or somebody is forcing it on you. So these images just quickly show that, yes, region by region, people have their own definitions of architecture and sustainability. If you are very wealthy, yes, you can build what we see here in Dubai, because money, that economic purchasing power, is part of the culture and the sustainability of your region. How much money do you have? Or are you not working with money? How do you come together to build where it's sweat equity? So with all of these kinds of conversations, in 2014, I launched CPDI, and I want to give you a bit of background about CPDI, just so you understand some of the case studies I want to present in this lecture when you talk about sustainability, right? So how did CPDI come up with its ideology, its pedagogy, so that it could begin to address some of these questions on how do we come up with sustainable design, not just for architecture, but for urban planning, which is extremely important. I'm actually a planner whose passion is in architecture. For so many of you who know my story, you know how that story evolved. But in 2014, CPDI was launched, and it was about coming up with Africa's definition to its own built space, how it can design and build sustainably. And the idea was to get designers and artists and planners from around the world to engage in the conversation through competition. So we launched our competitions. We've had 4 designers from everywhere submitted. They were excited to join us in Africa to come up with some design languages based on our cultures, right? Our cultures are the most authentic thing about us, not our countries, because we know how our countries were formed. So just a few slides on some of that background. Many of our architects who won contributed to our work. You can see architect Aisha Aminu here, one of our leaders in this movement. But they came from all around the world. We then moved on to showcase the winning designs in exhibitions around so that more people could see and learn and understand, especially for us in Africa. Give some examples, because if you don't have any examples, when you say sustainable from a cultural perspective, what do you mean? We took it to the next level by having workshops, internships, asking architects from all over the African diaspora, come and let's see how we can fast track your own culture. So let's say you take a TV architecture from Benue or Urobo architecture. When you look at it in its authenticity, what sustainable practices can you pull out, indigenous science and technology, and fast track it so that we can incorporate that into all we do in the profession today, not just living it in the past. So from the workshops, we then launched the school, which is online. We looked for designers all around who had something to share so that they could come in and teach. What is Ashanti modern? What is Ndebele modern? What is Yoruba modern, right? So when you learn of these concepts, you can really come up with local sustainable solutions. Our pedagogy, of course, I always say this, you cannot talk about progress without those whose shoulders you're standing on. architect Dimas Wonko, architect David Hughes. It was their pedagogy, their theoretical frameworks on Afrocentric architecture that we used to build CPDI. So it's standing on their truth, on their foundation. So we took their information, added our own spin, taught architects from around the world using texts and research that other greats had already done, right? Architects from all around African Americans, Nigerians, folks from Niger, folks from Togo, from Haiti. What books, what texts exist to understand this pedagogy? So we're not starting from scratch. And then the last thing we did was launch our hub, CADA, which is a Center for Afrocentric Design Advancement. It is located at AUST, African University of Science and Technology, here in Abuja. And it's a place where designers, builders, contractors, engineers, artisans can come and learn about these materials. What is rammed earth? How do we use clay brick? How can we modernize thatch and use it to make roofing sheets? Thatch used to last for 10 years when our ancestors were using it. Why can't we do better? Right? So how do you take this information into a lab and modernize it and get it into the curriculums also, so that you're graduating built environment professionals with the knowledge of local culture-based sustainable design practices? Okay, so now that we've presented the contextual pedagogy for this presentation, let us examine a few case studies, best practices, and regulating frameworks for urban development in Nigeria. Okay, so talking about it, research, theorizing, all of that is fine. But if you cannot manifest it into the actual built environment, then it's just talk, right? What are some examples? Who's doing this? Who's finding ways all around Nigeria, Africa, the diaspora, right, to solve some of these sustainable problems? Let's look at some examples. So this very interesting image on the screen actually came in from our very first competition in 2015. It's called the Gojo House. It was submitted by 3 architect students from Ethiopia. Now I'm showing it because we got so many entries from Ethiopia that year, and I didn't understand why until I reached out to one of the HODs in the EIABC there, one of the universities, and he explained to me that Ethiopia had just launched this new mandate where, in order to get your building permit approved, the architect had to show that they had preserved some culture, some sustainable practices, science, technology in their design. And if the planners could confirm that they had done that, then they would get their building permit. So a lot of Ethiopians were sending their designs to our competitions. They were using us as a practice, kind of like test bed, to see if they could succeed in CPDI, then they could succeed once they graduated in their own country and get their designs approved when sent in. So many designs came in. So I'm saying this to say that when you talk about making regulations, planning boards, how do you make this part of the law, right? That built environment professionals will have to take into consideration sustainable practices. You can look at the image on the bottom right here. This is their traditional architecture from thousands of years. Yeah, they took it and they modernized it and came up with this 2-bedroom duplex. Very cute. You could use it for a house, for a restaurant, for anything. But if your regulating bodies say that you must be mindful of such sustainable practices, don't throw them out and start importing ways that you cannot maintain, they're not sustainable, right? If the government gets involved, you can see the kinds of changes that will happen. So anyway, Ethiopia was leading in that conversation. This is another image of that same building, this one in color with glass and all. This submission came in from 2 architects, Olalekan Afolabi and Ileola Gold from Lagos. They were winners in our 2017 competition. And I'm showing it because for many reasons, it's more than just sustainability, also in the climate change or materials. When you think about tourism, right? How tourism could be impacted if you are using the materials and designs from your own culture, how that could have an impact on your own community and your economic base. You look at this building, it's standing next to your standard steel and glass skyscraper. Nobody's going to be looking at that steel and glass, but they'll be looking at this other one. People can come from all over the world to enjoy and understand the inspiration. Why did they use this calabash, dismantle, reassemble, and create this amazing architecture? And what materials were used? What's the story that's imbibed in its concept, right? So sustainability has many uses. The next example I want to give, Habitat for Humanity. Many people know of Millard Fuller, but they don't know that this concept was actually built from an African practice. Congo, watching a community build a new house for a young man who just took a wife. He goes back to America and says, we'll create Habitat for Humanity. And what is Habitat for Humanity? Is when people come together, they raise money, they get donations, somebody dashes them land, and everybody comes and they build houses for themselves. The houses are either free or very inexpensive. That is built on an African concept. You're not waiting around looking for money, trying to figure out how you will afford a $300,000 mortgage or a 50 million naira mortgage, whatever. Your community did something that Africans used to do: come together, sweat equity. You can have one professional on site that is guiding everybody, but everybody else puts on their hard hats. Oh yeah, start making bricks, start standing these planks, whatever it is. Let's build these houses for ourselves. It's not, everything is not supposed to be about money. You can't sustain, right? Think about our economy in Nigeria today. So I give this example of somebody from outside taking an African concept and really, really, really making it global and eventually monetizing it, right? But that's not what you want to do. This local example is actually from my village. I'm from Iseluku in Delta State. Have to give a shout out also to my king. This is something that's actually practiced in a lot of places, but we don't always talk about it. We have new projects. You have citizens from your community, from your village, all around the world. Call them. Everybody send money, right? Everybody send money, and we'll use that money to build what we need in our community. It's going back to that African concept of sustainability, sweat equity. We do things together. So you have these local associations all over Europe, America, whatever. Everybody raises money, sends down to the village, and they start doing projects. Whatever the projects are, is it a clinic? Is it the gate welcoming everybody to our kingdom? Is it a school? Again, different approaches to sustainable development. Here are some of the projects. So these global and local case studies have successfully shown examples of private and public intervention to this conversation. Ethiopia and Morocco are leading examples for me of countries who have regulated and mandated this conversation in their building policies. In Ethiopia, we talked about the government saying you must show sustainable cultural heritage practices to get your building permit. In Morocco, it was almost the reverse. They said, okay, so the lead architect on site of their projects there is going to be a local master builder who did not go to school. All the trained professionals will answer to him on site. What does that do? That makes sure that those practices, heritage and all that is kept in the designs. So you go to Morocco and you see all the architecture is still proudly displaying their aesthetics, of course, their materials, the clay, the courtyards, being mindful of the climate. You don't have to put air conditioning everywhere. If you have your windows are open, they're allowing air to flow into courtyards, the heat is going up and out, right? So this practice I found amazing. That the local master builder is the one who is kind of like talking to the trained ones and keeping them in line, right? Francis Carey, he flipped it on its head. So he's the trained architect who even went abroad to become an expert. We all know how he's such a well-celebrated architect. Goes abroad, gets the education, comes back, but make sure that he works with the locals and they infuse what he's brought back with how they operate there to build. All of us know him, award-winning architect, recognized worldwide. And his only concern is that he focuses on his people in his town. He's so distracted with the world calling him. They want him to build this, build that there. And he's saying, just give me peace. I want to go back to my village. There's so much work to be done there. So in this image, we can see the women, the children, the men, everybody is doing local work, but they're blending that international edge with that local knowledge to build sustainably. They're not going around the world begging for, I mean, like I always say, the pyramids were not built with IMF funds, right? Africa was not built by begging money from Europe or anybody, China, anybody. How was Africa built? How were our empires built? All of our great work in Zimbabwe. It's unfortunate in Nigeria, we've pulled down much of our traditional masterpieces, right? It's unfortunate. Thank God in northern Nigeria, we still have our heritage showing in the built environment, right? But we didn't build by begging people for money. We came together, right? We had this knowledge. Architecture and construction was just part of the culture. Every child knew how to build, make the blocks, and we all knew the floor plans that went with our culture. If you're Yoruba, you know the floor plans, right? If you are Shekiri, you know the floor plans that go with your culture. So this stuff was our everyday knowledge, right? And so we're so much more empowered then when we work together and we were truly sustainable. Okay, so big ups to Francis Carey, but there are many that are doing this now. So we're very, very grateful. I cannot begin to close without talking about our very own, after all, I'm Nigerian, Dimas Wonko. What trends is he setting? For the past 50 years, he built sustainably. We understand that he's not a trained architect according to European standards, which we use today. He is a local master builder. He is a local genius. This man remembered, thankfully, he talks about the stories as a kid when he used to work and build on site with his father, the king, and all the local community to build the palaces and the homes in Ijumujeboko in Delta State, his own village. He remembered and he took that information and he built his masterpieces. Today, finally, he's recognized by us, but everybody else had been recognizing him. There are probably many Dimas Wonkos in Nigeria. Everybody should enter their village and their own local government area and find them, bring them out. Let's celebrate them. Let's learn from them because they have the answers to many of our problems. They have the answers to many of our problems. Sustainability, working together, the materials that actually work for our environment. Let's learn from them. The aesthetics. Again, when I say in CPDI and our architects, Amina, Chibuzo, Ikechukwu, Umar, all of them from around, Nate Robert Eze, Osayuki, when these architects enter our studios and come out with masterpieces that preserve the identity, the science and the technology of their culture, it's priceless. We all should do that. Let us find them in our communities, bring them out, get that information into our curriculums, and change Nigeria, change Africa. So thanks to Master Builder Dimas Wonko, all he's doing. Please, for those of you who have not visited his buildings, please go and look at them in my last 30 seconds. I encourage all of you all to follow us, engage with CPDI. Please become champions on this platform. We are dedicated to making sure that every architect and planner and artist voice from this continent and the African diaspora gets heard. People are decolonizing their curriculums worldwide. They want to hear from the African. What do we have to say? Because Africans wrote the book on sustainable design. Africans wrote the book on sustainable design. And we only put that book down because after colonization, they told us that everything we were doing was primitive and savage. And today they're looking for us to save them. African people, how do you build sustainable? The right materials that don't cause global warming and all those climate, all those things. But we've almost forgotten because we haven't practiced it in 100 years. And we removed it from our culture and it's not in our curriculums. So let's bring it back. Follow us, please. Join us. Let's champion each other. I have to say thank you so much for ACMAN for this invitation. Any questions, I'd love to answer. I'm so happy to be back in Abuja today. So please, I want to see you all also at the CADA hub at AUST here in Abuja. Thanks, everyone.